So you guys want to hear about the time an F-15 blew up a passenger train? Yeah, it's not a very fun topic. It's very sad, obviously. So I'm definitely gonna have to dumb down my usual humor for this. But the notion of it happening isn't necessarily outside the realm of consideration because, well, an F-15 is a war machine, and in war, railroads are a prime target in many cases. After all, railroads are the best way to transport a large amount of things, long distances, quickly. So, they are one of the first things to get targeted whenever you're trying to beat a foreign power into submission. However, hitting a passenger train is a little different. I mean, it's one thing to blow up the lines, or even targeting a freight train, but a passenger train is just that, it's a passenger train. And unless you know it's full of troops, it's just civilians, and blowing up civilians is very World War II Luftwaffe, and less agreeable to most people, I would say. But the investigations that followed into this situation showed that this was probably an accident, an unfortunate one, because while the F-15 was targeting the bridge that the train was going over, the pilot didn't know the train was there until it was too late. Let me start at the beginning. This particular incident is known as the Grdelica train bombing. I think it's pronounced Grdelica. Maybe it's Grdelica. I think it's Gerd, though, so we're gonna go with Grdelica. And it took place during Operation Allied Force, which was a NATO combat operation against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Why was NATO attacking Yugoslavia? Well, it was late 90s, and what was happening was known as the Kosovo War, an armed conflict in Kosovo, a landlocked country located in southeast Europe. At least, it is now. Prior to the war, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia controlled Kosovo, but they were dealing with an uprising via the Kosovo Albanian separatist militia, sometimes called the Kosovo Liberation Army, or KLA. And in these kind of conflicts, well, there's issues on both sides, but from a global perspective and in general, the KLA were seen as a bit more sympathetic because they were resisting straight-up oppression. Historically, the ethnic Albanians that lived in Kosovo have been dealing with significant discrimination via Serbian authorities. Yugoslavia had also continuously resisted efforts to allow Kosovo to be autonomous. And though early methods for accomplishing their goals did consist of peaceful resistance, eventually they decided this isn't working, we're just gonna start shooting people. They started small, with acts of sabotage against police organizations, and over time began to smuggle weapons into the country and became a pretty major fighting force. The whole thing began spiraling out of control into a full-blown war. Eventually, Yugoslavia decided it was a really good idea to double down on the whole oppression thing and began tossing a significant majority of Albanians out of Kosovo, forcefully removing them. The countries of NATO have been watching the situation closely, naturally, and at that point they were like, okay, listen. No! Stop it! Now! Or else. Or else what? Or else we'll... Yo, what are we gonna do? We're gonna bomb the crap out of them. We're gonna bomb the crap... We're gonna what? Yeah, that was the solution. We're just gonna... We heard you all need some freedom! We've seen this kind of story happen time and time again. Armed intervention in a foreign conflict. But in this instance, I do lean on the side of the intention of NATO here, on the basis that afterwards it was found that there was a systemic campaign of terror against the Albanian population from Yugoslavia. That was going on. And while post-war findings found that it didn't qualify as a genocide because the people were being displaced, not murdered, it was still pretty horrific, with the Albanians being treated as subhuman. And the NATO airstrikes, though controversial, did result in the end of the conflict. Yugoslavia didn't have the means to deal with, well, and the whole thing would be resolved with what's known as the Kuban-Novo Agreement, which was signed on June 9th, 1999. Both the Yugoslavians and the Serbian forces agreed to withdraw from Kosovo entirely, and allow an international representative government to step in to stabilize the region. Eventually they would declare their independence on February 17, 2008, and though Serbia still doesn't recognize them as a sovereign state, they accept the governing authority of the Kosovo institutions as part of the 2013 Brussels Agreement. So basically they're like, yeah, you're not independent, also, you can do whatever you want. Like, it's just one of those things. And you're probably like, that's all well and good, Darkers, but what the heck is up with the friggin' train? And, okay, so, back to the whole NATO bombing thing. Naturally, there were a lot of targets, and initially, all of them were military. However, they were trying to convince the Yugoslavian government to stop it and sit down at the peace table, okay? Or we're gonna drop more freedom on you. And by mid-April, they decided that instead of just military targets, they would also have to target strategic and economic ones, which included transport links like bridges. In the area where this happened, there was a bridge, which passed over the South Morava River in Grdelica Gorge. The target was meant to not actually kill anybody directly, because it was just a bridge. If no one was on the bridge, they'd be fine, but you want to get rid of the bridge, because then, well, the trains can't go over the river, and that cuts off a supply line. The intent here is obvious. However, there was a train on the bridge. An F-15E Strike Eagle was sent to target and destroy the bridge, firing an AGM-130 missile at around 11:40 hours local time. And the missile was right on target, striking the bridge as it was supposed to, at the same moment that the number 393 passenger train was crossing the bridge. The missile also didn't actually destroy the bridge, meaning that technically the pilot would have to hit it again to accomplish his mission, but also passenger train! In his defense, he had fired the missile from so far away he couldn't visually see the bridge. He wasn't required to directly identify it, because these missiles can fire at targets from miles and miles out. There was no reason to get up close, or at least they thought so, because they didn't think a train was actually going to be there. There was one. According to General Wesley Clark, who was the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe at the time, the pilot did go around for a second pass, but again wasn't targeting the train. See, despite the train taking damage, as far as he could tell, the train had passed safely over the bridge, so his intention was to complete his mission by simply targeting the side of the bridge the train had already gone over, because, well, that would get rid of the bridge, but also not actually blow up the train, because he wasn't trying to do that. He fired the second missile and was deeply alarmed to see the train moving into the target area instead of away from it as the pilot had thought. The train was struck a second time, utterly destroying it. Sources differ on exactly how many people died in this particular situation, but the Human Rights Watch organization claims at least 20 were killed or missing. If you ask Tanjug, a Serbian state news agency, 50 people were killed. So that's probably an exaggeration if I'm being honest, because according to the Serbian government, they say 55 were killed, but other sources say it could be as low as 15. But regardless of the exact number, multiple civilians were killed by a NATO missile strike, which wasn't supposed to happen. And there was significant controversy surrounding it because, well, frankly, no one felt they should be attacking civilian targets. Again, the intention here wasn't to do that. I mean, I guess you could say targeting the rail line in general is doing that, but, you know, not the people directly. General Clark insisted that the whole situation was deeply regrettable and that they were very sorry for it, explaining that they were doing their absolute best to avoid collateral damage. And many people say, no, you did that on purpose, but if I'm being frank, I don't think they were. I think this was an accident, because when you're dealing with any kind of war situation, you can only be so precise. Regardless of how accurate your missiles are, regardless of how accurate your bomb drops are, regardless of all the intelligence you gather, look, this is war, we're shooting at each other, we're blowing each other up. Civilians, non-combatants, whatever you want to call them, are going to be in the way. That's war. That's what happens. I'm not saying it's okay that this happened, but I do believe that the NATO forces definitely didn't do that on purpose. But given how many bombs were dropped and how many missiles were fired during this whole ridiculous debacle, it was inevitable that civilians were going to get killed. Because again, it's war. There was more controversy surrounding it because the F-15 had a gun camera and the footage was released. The media claimed that the footage was sped up to give the viewer the false impression regarding how much time the pilot had to react to the situation, but both the Pentagon and NATO explained that that was an error, and it was a result of the video being sped up for battle damage assessment purposes, but not actually being slowed down again for the press conference where it was shown. A possible oversight, yeah. Intentional deception to try to ease people off of being so super critical over the whole thing. Also possible. I mean, it's just... Various groups, especially on the Yugoslav/Serbian side of things, characterized the attack as a crime, while others were a bit more lenient but did criticize the pilot's action of attacking a second time after the first missile strike. Because the first one, well, it was pretty easy to see that he didn't know the train was there, but after he identified that the train was there, why did you do that again? I mean, I already explained what his thought process was, but it's understandable that some people were like, hey, maybe you shouldn't have hurled another explosion in a civilian's general direction, my guy. Amnesty International argued that it violated Article 57 of Protocol 1, a 1977 amendment protocol to the Geneva Conventions, which requires an attack to be cancelled or suspended if it becomes clear that the objective is not a military one. A committee was established via the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, or ICTY, in May of 1999 to determine whether offenses against international law had actually been committed during the NATO campaign, and that included this particular attack on the train. But believe it or not, in the end, after going over all the evidence, the ICTY, despite you'd think being somewhat biased, admitted that this particular bombing was probably fair. For one thing, the committee acknowledged that the bridge itself was a legitimate military objective, and they felt that the passenger train wasn't deliberately targeted. Regarding the second strike, they pointed out that the bridge length, as far as NATO was concerned, had been estimated at 50 meters, and the pilot likely believed that there would have been sufficient room for him to finish his job without actually hitting the train again. He was wrong, he completely misjudged this, but they accept that's likely what he thought. The committee was pretty divided over whether or not the aircrew had behaved recklessly, but eventually decided that the attack shouldn't be subject to further investigation for, say, a war crime, on the basis that they felt that the second missile strike was simply an error of judgment, and not an intentional effort to, kill innocent people. There simply wasn't evidence to suggest that the aircrew was really trying to destroy that train, just that they had made a bad call, putting the train in further harm's way when they could have not done that. Regardless of how you slice it, regardless of what your personal opinions are, that's pretty much how the whole thing ended. Then no matter what the final ruling is, it doesn't bring back anyone who died that day. Today, there sits a memorial to the lives lost in the bombing, a solemn reminder that when it comes to war, you simply can't avoid civilian casualties. So I'd argue, maybe we shouldn't do the war thing at all. We could try that. It's an option, guys. I'm just saying. Put down the gun for a second. Let's try to talk about this. Oh, we're gonna shoot each other some more. Okay, that's fine. That seems typical. Whatever. I just live on this planet.